I am going to welcome Dr. Stacy Smallwood, who is the Executive Director of the Gilead Faith Coordinating Center at Wake Forest School of Divinity, who is going to come and share with us the very critical and important work that they are doing in the South as communities of faith to move us forward. Dr. Smallwood.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It is truly an honor to be in this space and share this space with you all that for the entire day has been both humbling and healing. And I am just so appreciative, and I do not feel as though I'm among strangers because even though I am new to my position, so many of you all I've had the chance to meet and interact with even in the short time that I've been here. You will see some photos of some of the places where I first encountered some of our partners at the Faith Compass Center. And so it is just, this whole experience has not only been affirming, but it also has been holy. And I really am appreciative to all of you for the amazing work that you are doing, both in this space and also outside. And so I'm just really glad to be in the number with you. So let me go back. Before I go into this presentation to kind of talk about what the Faith Compass Center is and what we do and where we're going, I do want to give a little bit of information about me because for many of you, I may not be a very familiar face, but I am not new to this work. So I've been working in the field of HIV prevention, treatment, and advocacy for more than 20 years. I started out in direct services. So I was working at the CBO. I was one of the pre-test counselors. I was doing outreach for Black MSM. I was standing outside the club at 1 o'clock in the morning passing out the Safer Sex kits. I then moved into occupational HIV prevention, working with healthcare workers to prevent needle sticks and sharps injuries, to prevent HIV and hepatitis B and hepatitis C infection. Then I moved into capacity building. So I worked with a program called the Institute for HIV Prevention Leadership, in which we trained HIV prevention program managers from CBOs across the nation and territories on health promotion and disease prevention, as well as organizational sustainability and strategic planning and management. And it was during that time that I said, I'm good with the MPH. I don't want to go any further. I just want to do the work. But then as I'm talking with these managers and these EDs from across the country about the things that they're facing, I start asking questions. And the main question that kept coming up for me is, where is faith in all of this? And that was the point at which my mentors said, now you sound like a researcher. It's time for you to go get that PhD. But my research started out and continues to be at the intersection of faith and health. And so I have done work with Black same-gender loving men, particularly in the Deep South, around the intersections of religiosity, spirituality, and mental and sexual health. Now, my work is moving into a slightly different direction, a slightly different valence, because so much of what we tend to do is around deficits, right? We talk about homophobia, we talk about stigma, we talk about all of these negative experiences, but what would it do for us to have a research agenda that focuses on the joy and the resilience that we have, right? What would it look like for our research to then move into the space where we're looking at the ways in which Black queer people have actually integrated both their religious and their sexual identities in healthy ways? What does that look like? So that is still the research that I'm doing, as I am also very honored to step into the space of the Faith Compass Center. And so I'm coming at this 3 months in, so y'all please bear with me. I spent 10 years as a professor, and so that's why I wasn't in a lot of these spaces as much as I would have liked to be, but it feels so good to come home. So I want to frame this talk about looking forward and looking back for the Faith Compass Center in terms of a song. And that song is Looking for a Miracle. Now, when I do talks like this for colleges, like the students that I used to teach, Many of them do not have the same background that we have in here. So I have to explain who the Clark sisters are. I have to explain their impact. Thank goodness I do not have to do that today. I just want to invoke the lyrics from one of their major songs that says, I'm looking for a miracle. I expect the impossible. I feel the intangible. I see the invisible. And the reason why I want to frame this talk about what we do around these lyrics is because so often the work that we do in this space is about seeing the invisible or seeing the invisibilized. People who have been rendered invisible, but who exist and have stories and have loved ones and have narratives, but they don't get the mic. They don't get the platform. They don't get the amplification. And so I want to frame the work of the Faith Compass Center in this idea of how we support all of you in being able to make sure that those that have been rendered invisible in our communities can actually be seen and seen accurately. So I'm going to start this before I get specific about the Faith Compass Center within the larger framework of the Gilead Compass Initiative. And so I'm happy to showcase this particular image. This is from an infographic that was produced by the Compass Initiative for Southern HIV AIDS Awareness Day. Y'all may see somebody familiar there on that right side. But the Compass Initiative is a multi-million-dollar investment that Gilead Sciences made in order to combat HIV in the South. And so it is dedicated to supporting organizations and individuals who are doing the work of supporting those who are vulnerable to and living with HIV. And so initially, there were 3 coordinating centers that were initially funded. But a group of people, some of whom are in this room right now, got together and said, you cannot do this work in the South without including faith. And so that was when the Faith Coordinating Center, now the Faith Compass Center, became the 4th coordinating center as part of the Compass Initiative. So even though we were late to be formed and supported, the impact that we're having is no less transformational. So just to point out a little bit about what the Compass Initiative has done, there are 4 focal areas. So each coordinating center has a different aspect that they focus on. So we have one coordinating center that's focused on capacity building, one on stigma reduction, one on well-being and trauma-informed care, and then the 4th is our center, which is about faith-based advocacy. A big part of the Compass Initiative is grant making. Many people and organizations that are represented in this room have received funding through the Compass Initiative. But overall to date, there have been 424 grants that have been awarded. There have been 253 peer-to-peer trainings because capacity building is a huge component of this initiative. There have been 281 grants that have been awarded to organizations led by priority populations, including people living with HIV, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and so many others. And so this is a $100 million investment over 10 years to communities across the South. And so in the past 5 years of the overall Compass Initiative, there have been close to 500 organizations that have been funded, more than almost 4,000 partnerships that have been created and growing, 46,000 leaders that have been trained, almost 500,000 people served via partner programs, almost $100 million leveraged by the partners, and more than 100 million people who have been reached via our campaigns. And so we are continuing to do this work, but also looking at the fact that Compass will not always be around, and so sustainability is going to be one of the things that I'm going to be talking about towards the end of this talk. But across the bottom, you can see where some of the other coordinating centers and implementing partners are, including the University of Houston, including Emory University, as well as the Southern AIDS Coalition. So to bring it to our particular center, what brings me into this space today, the purpose and the mission of the Faith Compass Center is to advance the capacity and organizational resiliency of faith communities in HIV throughout the U.S. South through transformative storytelling. This has been a huge thread that has been binding all of us together all day. How do we tell our stories differently? How do we change narratives away from stigma and move those narratives towards more life-affirming and transformational stories? How do we not only elicit those stories, but how do we also then platform and amplify them? We also provide that through informative educational offerings. And I'll talk about our faith and health education initiatives. And also strategic grant making. So again, funding the organizations that are doing this amazing work. And oftentimes, organizations that don't get looked at by some of these other grant-making mechanisms. This is on YouTube, and so I need to be careful with how I frame things. Talk to me afterwards. But again, shifting away from these deficit-based perspectives and moving towards more life-enhancing possibilities through the narratives that we share. So who are the people who are doing this work? Many of you know Dr. Shonda Jones, who is actually joining us virtually today. I am just stepped in literally 45 minutes ago as the executive director, but so happy to be here. Other members, thank you. Other members of our team include Dr. Tarsha Bannister, Dr. Mia Sloan, Diane, for those of you who are funded in some way, shape, or form. The checks come from Diane, and so we appreciate her. And I also want to lift up our strategic partnerships manager who is here with us, Marcus Hawley. And so we like to refer to our team as being small but mighty. And truly, we are endeavoring to do a mighty work. So we shift these cultural narratives in a few different ways. One is through capacity building. And I also like to say capacity strengthening, because even the smallest, most fledgling organization still has capacity because they came together in the first place. So it's not about building, it's about enhancing and strengthening what is already there. Another piece that feeds into our work is through the provision of theologically based education. How do we disrupt prevailing theological perspectives and narratives that have led us into this deficit perspective and shift those and tell a more affirming story? And then also the curation of brave and inclusive spaces, right? So I talk about the fact that spaces can occupy multiple places at the same time. Spaces can be safe for us to be able to make mistakes or say things or feel as though we have a refuge when everything around us feels like storm. But those spaces also need to be brave and they need to be accountable. We need to be held accountable in the work that we are doing. And so our job is to help curate those kinds of spaces as well. So some of our programs, and I know that these slides have a lot of words, do not pay attention to the words. This is a new template that is still undergoing revision, but I just want to talk about some of the programs that we have. This one is our HIV and Faith Ambassadors program. And so, you are. So, we are currently in our second cohort of the HIV and Faith Ambassadors program. Our first cohort focused primarily on North Carolina. Now we have expanded through the entire South. But this is a capacity strengthening program for faith leaders, religious leaders, community advocates, and also providers and clinicians to be able to get the tools, well, maybe not tools, because we just talked earlier today about what tools actually are, but to get equipped with the knowledge and the skills and the insights that can support these advocates to go out and have theologically based conversations around HIV and the intersection of faith and health in their respective communities. And we have two of our senior coaches who are in here right now, Sandy and Carrie. So glad for all the leadership and the guidance that you were providing to our coaches. So there is individualized coaching that is available to the ambassadors in addition to the educational offerings that they receive. So this is basically a 10-month program in which they participate in such trainings as HIV in the Bible, health and wellness, how to set up a health and wellness ministry, even into sustainability and grant making. What does it look like to put together a compelling proposal that will enable you to sustain the work that you're doing? So we currently have about 35 ambassadors in our current cohort when we were only aiming for 25. So we are thankful for the increase. Another thing, as I have mentioned before, is grant making. Grant making is central to the Compass Initiative framework. And so to date, we have more than 100 funded partners through Faith Compass alone, with more than 1,200 community partners, with about more than $3 million that have been awarded through grants. And so the 3 grant programs that we have that you've heard about to some degree today, one is our transformational grant program, which is kind of a larger grant around advocacy, stigma reduction. We also have our Faith Action, which is kind of a smaller version of the transformative grant partners. But then we also have the lit cohort. So we had Reverend Marvin Anderson, who shared his music video today. And he identified that it was Faith Compass funding that supported him in his ability to actually produce this and step into this space and own that voice that he is exercising. And so in the lit cohort, which stands for Learning It Together, artists were able to receive coaching, they received funding, and they were able to produce everything from music to poetry to visual art and all kinds of things in between. And again, using the arts as a way to help shift the narrative that is prevailing around HIV. But we also have some other offerings that are not necessarily related to the initial Compass initiative, right? So again, we came in a little bit late. We came in during phase 2. We're currently in phase 3, which is dissemination, and we'll talk more about that. But Faith Compass Center also offers faith and health education through webinars, virtual learning opportunities. We just wrapped up our summer learning collaborative, which was a four monthly webinars on different topics related to HIV and faith. Dr. Burley actually facilitated our last one on syndemics and the National HIV AIDS strategy. We also are doing screenings of the docuseries Gospel. How many of you are familiar with the docuseries Gospel? I see a couple of hands going up. So this is a docuseries that was produced by Dr. Henry Louis Gates, of Finding Your Roots, and it documents the history of gospel music and the history of the Black church in America. And it also takes on some of the issues related to that intersection of faith and HIV. And so we go around to different places to be able to offer screenings of certain clips, and then we have discussion about what those clips showed. And so if you are interested in possibly holding or sponsoring or curating one of those screenings, please see either me or Marcus or El Nicole, because we would be happy to have that conversation with you. Another thing that we are doing is we are branching out more into the space of faith and health writ large. And so we just became the home for the annual John W. Hatch Lecture and Symposium. This was previously curated by the UNC Chapel Hill Gilling School of Public Health, along with an organization called Faith Health. And so now it has found its home at Wake Forest. Our next Hatch lecture is going to be in December. And so again, if you're interested in attending either in person or virtually, we'll be happy to share that information with you. But we're also recognizing that there are multiple ways for us to be able to engage with communities. And a lot of that involves, as we've talked about today, digital and social media presence. For us, that includes not just posting on our social media platforms, but also we have a podcast called Faith Against Stigma. Season 2 is on the way, so please be on the lookout. And then we have our Summer Institute. Some of the people in here remember this experience that we had June 18th through the 20th. I was a couple of weeks into the job when this came about. But this is what helped to solidify the idea and the notion that I am exactly where God wants me to be in order to do this kind of work. And so we held our 2024 Summer Institute at Wake Forest University and entitled Restoring and Restoring. And it was all about how we take our sacred memory and use it and activate it in order to transform narratives around HIV. That we do not have to leave any of our traditional or familial experiences, those things that helped us get over, we do not have to leave them at the door for the sake of operating in terms of Christian messaging, right? We can change the narrative and still bring all of who we are into it. So we had everything from the setting of the altar, the pouring of libation. We had challenge wheels, which you see on the right, in which we took our attendees through a journey through what does it mean to have a colonized imagination? How could things be different if we had a decolonized imagination? What is possible? Who could we be and who can we be if we let go of some of the things that have been holding us back? In the middle, you see a standing in a circle holding a rope, and that rope represented our biogenetic connection. In this activity, each of us was given a red ribbon, and we tied the red ribbon around the rope while invoking the name of an ancestor. Whether it was someone who may have been well known and famous, whether it was someone in our family, whether it was someone whose name the world writ large may never have known. But when we tied that rope, we not only tied it in their memory, but we also took care to ask, what is it that we need from that ancestor in this moment for us to be able to continue, for us to sustain? And we recognize that as all of us tied our ancestral ribbon around that rope, that all of us had access to the knowledge and the resilience and the experience that existed in each individual. So these are the kinds of, and I would be remiss if I didn't say that we also gave examples of what it means to take biblical text and transform the narrative around that. What would it look like for us to go to Mark 5 about the woman with the issue of blood, and rather than thinking about her as an abstract individual who can only be identified by her diagnosis, but actually think of her as an actual person? What would it mean for us to look at the transfer of power that took place and say the power did not flow in, it was not Jesus that healed her, but the power flowed from him, and he recognized it, and he said, your faith has made you well. What would it mean for us to recognize that Jesus does not refer to her as the woman with the issue of blood, but he ends up calling her daughter? How do we take these traditional texts and look at them in a different way to tell a different story? I'm going to pause there because, whew. Ooh. Look, Dr. Burley got me on a time crunch. So as I get ready to close, I want to close with this idea of, okay, so here's what we have done. But where do we go from here? What do the next 5 years of the Compass Initiative look like? For one, that includes a more robust community engagement plan, cultivating diverse and authentic partnerships. And let me pause for a moment about this idea of an authentic partnership. I think most everybody in this room understands that some of these larger organizations that come to us and ask us to do the community engagement are basically looking at us to do what they may consider to be the grunt work and leverage the connections and the relationships that we have to satisfy their transactional outcomes and goals. So what does it look like for us to take the time and the effort to build authentic, bi-directional partnerships? We've already begun doing this. How do we take this to the next level? The next piece that we want to expand upon in the next 5 years is our research and evaluation. Right, so again, I come from academia. I'm a slightly reformed academic here. And what I recognize is that nothing happens if we don't have the right data, but that's the problem. Some of the things that we need in order to tell our story to the people who have the funding to be able to award to us, the ways in which we document that are not legible to them. So how can we come up with new and innovative ways to collect data that helps to tell our story? What does it look like for us to develop a survey that shows how a Black queer person can integrate their sexual and their religious identities and that they do not have to be constantly at odds with each other? What does that look like? We also need to take a syndemics approach because we also understand that while Compass funded us to do HIV, we also know that HIV is not a silo. It does not exist simply unto itself. It is related to so many other diagnoses, and I'm not just talking about STIs here, right? But what we really ultimately want to do is be a sustainable, transdisciplinary nexus point. Sometimes our funders make us get into our own little pockets or silos. But what would it look like for us to use our radical imagination to bring the clinician and the public health worker and the minister and the sports people and the arts people and all of them together to imagine something that is grander and different? So this is where we are planning to go, and we are excited about partnering with you to get there. And so as I get ready to close, you all already know how the song ends. The sky is the limit to what I can have. Just believe and receive it. Just believe and receive it. One of the gifts of Black people to this space is that we have always had the ability to see what is and imagine something different. There was nothing empirical about us coming over here and seeing nothing but subjugation and chattel slavery, but imagining a space in which we could be free. So we just believe and receive it, and God will perform it today. So I am excited to be in conversation with you, to be thought partners with you, and we are so excited about the future of the Faith Compass Center.